What I worry about is actually students unwilling to share because of fear of judgment that they're going to be canceled. I have an opinion that no one in the class shares. I'm afraid if I share that opinion, what are they going to think of me? And I think part of it is what we see so much in the wider world, where someone says something, what happens? They get canceled. They, don't follow that person, etc. And what we are dealing with, in my case, dealing with teenagers, students, we want them to have ideas that are not fully formed, so that we can play around with it and say, let's talk about this. How did you come to that conclusion?
That was Julian Braxton. Welcome to the Teacher Sphere. I'm your host, Kobe Nelson. Today, we're exploring what makes civil discourse possible in schools. In this episode, Bruce and Julian will talk with Sarah Lane about how they've helped students and staff move past fear and assumptions to engage in meaningful dialogue. You'll hear practical strategies for building trust, creating classroom norms, and discover why listening might be a leader's most powerful tool.
We're very excited to welcome our guest today. We'll start with Bruce Stubblefield. Could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Bruce Stubblefield. I am a decade-long plus educator. I've been working in public education for the last 12 years, and most recently, I served as the social studies content lead for Hamilton County Schools. I am actually in the middle of a big transition. I'm making the leap to private school, starting for the 25-26 school year at a all-girls preparatory school. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's been a very interesting transition so far, and I'm looking forward to a new adventure.
Thank you so much. And how about you, Julian? We have Julian Braxton here with us.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Julian Braxton, and I'm the Director of Community and Inclusion at the Windsor School in Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm also a high school history teacher. I've been at Windsor for about 26 years, and Windsor is an all-girls private school, grades 5 through 12. And all of my professional career has been working in private schools, though I was educated in New York City public schools.
Thank you so much. So, just wanted to get started with hearing a little bit more about your background in terms of some of the things that you've led. So, this being more of a leadership focused podcast, we'd love to hear a little bit about how you've helped lead initiatives that tie in civil discourse. So, I'll go back to you, Bruce. I'm wondering if you could tell us about your background and experience with inquiry based approaches in education.
As a content lead, one of the first things I kind of did was um, jump in and see what the lay of the land was in terms of pedagogy across my district, particularly as it pertained to social studies. And I noticed that there was something lacking, and I couldn't put my finger on it for quite a while. And then I spent some time at NCSS, and I started noticing a lot of people talking about the C3 framework and inquiry, and just like question based investigative style teaching. And so I happened to join a PD in which Kathy Swan from the C3 framework was leading, and I just messaged her, and I basically just sparked up a partnership with her, where I had her coming in and doing some PD with my teacher leaders. Um, and so we spent a whole year. She would Zoom in with us once a month, train our teachers in inquiry based learning. And then we basically empowered those teacher leaders to basically be the messengers to the rest of the district, right? As some persons in central office, I was very, very aware of the perception of central office. So a lot of things, when they come from me, don't go over so well. When they come from their peers, there's a lot more buy-in. So my strategy was literally to invest in our teacher leaders and let them take the message forward. And so that initiative started about 2 years ago, and I think it's still ongoing right now, especially as I've transitioned out of the role.
Thank you so much for that context. And Julian, so for you as an educator and director of community and inclusion, how does your role intersect with fostering connections between educators and students?
No, my title, Director of Community and Inclusion, at the heart of that really is building communities of belonging and connection. And that really takes intentional work. And I think about, for example, the recent election. And we know that the country and various communities were polarized. We live in polarized communities. And so, what I believe at the heart of being able to have a productive conversation about the issues in the election, students needed to be able to, first of all, be informed about what the issues were, and also not approach it from a standpoint of a debate. Um, Many of the issues that people are divided about, they're not going to change anyone's mind. So the idea really is to be able to express their point of view and hopefully learn something about another person's point of view. Last summer, our faculty, as a entire faculty and staff, read the book "I Never Thought of It That Way" by Monica Guzman. And central to that book is the idea of just being able to hear another person's idea and being able to ask questions. I remember we had a graduation speaker, Carol Gilligan, and she said to us, when you find yourself in a state of judgment, turn that judgment into curiosity. So helping students get the tools of being inquisitive and trying not to. And when they're, it's not to judge because we are conditioned to judge, but when they are judging, to recognize that and how to turn that into curiosity, and that takes intentional skill building work that we throughout the year and in our classrooms and through community gatherings as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful context for both of your work. And it really ties into what we're wanting to start discussing around the relationships that you're building with both staff and students, which you both began to speak to and sharing your background. So, connecting to those background pieces that you just shared, want to dig into that a little bit more as far as relationship building. So, I'm curious on when you're thinking about preparing students for civil discourse, or even the aspect of preparing teachers and doing that with students, why do you feel like relationship building is such a crucial starting point? Julian, do you want to start us off?
Relationship building is at the heart of everything. I think, particularly when you think about students, they are working on teams, they're working in all kinds of situations where they are in relationship to each other. And so if we use that to our advantage when we talk about civil discourse, we are meeting them where they are. We are giving them the opportunity to engage in dialogue that allows them not to keep their identity or identities aside, but to embrace that and to be able to talk about who they are as a part of the discussion. So when I think about these conversations around civil discourse, people are bringing themselves to the table, which is what sometimes makes can make the conversation very difficult. But I think at the heart of it, you really don't want to leave that behind. You really want to embrace that to be able to talk about who you are, your background, and how that shapes your ideas. So I often think about the fact that I grew up in New York City, a very urban environment. I live in another urban city, Boston, and those shape the way that I feel about lots of things, including policy. Um, that is going to be a very different conversation about some policies. If I, for example, have a good friend that I've worked with for years in Montana, his ideas about policy and maybe even public transportation may be very different because of his local environment. And so I think just being able to talk about our relationships and who we are, we bring that to the table to help us understand how we arrive at the uh, ideas that we have about a whole range of political issues.
Julian, I really appreciate how you tied into your personal background as well, and how those background pieces also impact how students and staff are coming into these discussions. So thank you for that. And Bruce, what would you like to add on as far as preparing students or staff for civil discourse?
One, I would say Julian hit the nail on the head, right? It truly is everything. I would add that I think that relationships allow you as a classroom teacher to go much further with what you can do as a teacher and what your students can do. Um, if you have good relationships with your students, they're willing to just do anything for you. There's the sky's the limit, honestly. So it is super vital for any new teacher, anyone coming into education, to realize that you're not just coming in to teach your content. You're coming in to build relationships with those students to teach your content.
If I could add one thing, um, Bruce made some really important points that I just wanted to underscore. I think in thinking about this work with teachers, we have to our advantage an opportunity. Many of our students, we see them more than during the week than their parents do, right? And so we know what works for them in terms of the content. We can push them. We know how much to push, when to push, and where to, pull back. And so I think that at the heart of it is the relationship that we have with our individual students and our individual classes. I know teaching all these years, I know the dynamics of an individual class. I may be able to teach this very same lesson that I have for one section, but I know this other section, maybe even because of the time of the day, the dynamics in the student, I may want to hold off on that lesson. So being able to be in tune with our students as educators really helps us to cultivate belonging and community, which is at the heart of
So
civil discourse.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that because it connects back to that development of trust and knowing your students and that trust leading to having the ability to be vulnerable with each other in these discussions, both as a teacher and for students to be vulnerable with one another in some really complex conversations. Um, so, wanting to dig into some of those barriers. So, one would be that piece of if there isn't maybe that trust or that vulnerability in that space. But I'm curious, what barriers or biases are you seeing that might be preventing students from engaging authentically with different perspectives?
I think there's a couple barriers that I would kind of highlight. One being, um, you know, a lot of students kind of adopt their parental beliefs, and this starts very, very early on. My wife teaches kindergarten, and she can routinely tell me that so and so parents believe this because this kid just, basically parroted what their parents were saying. So there's some stuff coming from the home that influence their beliefs and biases. And then I would say probably more recently, over the last probably decade or so, the internet is drastically influencing a lot of students' um, thinking, whether it be through TikTok, whether it be through Reddit, or once upon a time, Tumblr, whatever. A lot of that stuff, unsupervised in a lot of cases, is changing how students think about themselves, how they think about the country, how they think about life in general. So those are some barriers that I think teachers are constantly having to deal with in the classroom, which underscores the importance of relationships. Because how do you talk to a student that might have a diametrically opposed viewpoint to just about everybody in the classroom, but they have that viewpoint because that's all they know, right? That's what they grew up with. So the relationship aspect is so important to being able to reach those students and have a at least a starting point for civil discourse.
At Bruce, you hit on all the points I was thinking about, and at the heart of what I worry about is actually students unwilling to share because of fear of judgment that they're going to be canceled. I have an opinion that no one in the class shares. I'm afraid if I share that opinion, what are they going to think of me? And I think part of it is what we see so much in the wider world, where someone says something, what happens? They get canceled. They, don't follow that person, etc. Um, and what we are dealing with, in my case, dealing with teenagers, students, we want them to have ideas that are not fully formed, so that we can play around with them and say, let's talk about this. How did you come to that conclusion? What kind of questions? And so this fear of judgment and the fear that that they will say something that may be uncomfortable, I think can be a big barrier. And I think at the heart of that is trying to figure out what are the norms in the classroom that will allow for really pressing each other to be able to say, you know what, let's hear another way of thinking about that idea. So to get those ideas out, I think is very important.
Yeah, and this makes me think about a problem that we often hear at Sphere on that canceling piece. And there's also a concern from educators right now. Well, maybe our classroom discussion is going great, but students are then afraid that when they go into the cafeteria, that's when the real drama will happen because of something that happened in class. I'm wondering if either of you have any tips or insight how to move past that concern of canceling and having kind of the whole school feel like a safe space to have these discussions.
I think part of it, thinking about a conversation that goes outside of the classroom, I want to deal with that the very first day of class, right? Like, what can we in this classroom be able to talk about and know that we can share without feeling that it's going to get out of the classroom? And so establishing what those norms are, I think it'd be really important because in the classroom, people are vulnerable. People do share things that can be really challenging. And so setting guidelines for that can be very, very important. And I also think that part of it is dealing with it at the moment, like making sure, almost like an exit ticket. Is everyone okay? Is there something that's on your mind so that it doesn't go out? Now, we do want the learning to go out. We want the wonderful things that we talk about, the case studies that we talk about. We don't want to attribute it to an individual person, because when we start doing that, Julian said such and such, it becomes a violation. And part of that violation is that no matter how much you share it, people don't have the context of exactly what that person said. So it's almost like a game of telephone. And if you start sharing a little bit of a story, that immediately becomes inaccurate. So really establishing those norms can be very important, I find, in those
Yeah,
situations.
and I would add 2 things. One being, yes, it does start with the norms in the classrooms. Also, too, I think, there just has to be a culture shift in terms of the leadership in the school, right? The principals, the administrators really set the tone for the school. So if that's the tone that the principal sets, that's the tone that a lot of the teachers are going to set in their own classrooms. And so you want to make sure that you're building that school culture that one isn't trying to cancel a student just because they speak out. And the other thing I would add is that I think the fear of cancellation um, is more overblown in real life than it happens online, right? The reality is much people are much less likely to um, cancel you in person, right? If they know you, if they see you face to face, because you have built those relationships, right? So I think it's there. The danger is much more online when stuff moves from the classroom online. That's where you see a lot of the fear. So it's learning one and I would also I guess I could also add to this that there's a lot of digital citizenship that has to kind of go along with all of this and talk about what that space is kind of doing to discourse as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with your point. I think the fear aspect of it is because of what they see online, and I can understand that. But when you're in a relationship with someone, you're not you've built that relationship, and so you're invested in it, and so you're not going to just dismiss that person. You might be trying to figure out how to have a challenging conversation, all those things, but you're not going to cancel them. That's a human being that you have a relationship with, that you sit in class with every day, and then thinking about how to have a conversation with them. And as adults, sometimes this happens too, right? A colleague said something that challenged you. How do you go back without feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't say anything in front of that person, that sort of thing. So just like thinking about how do we give the students and teachers the tools to be able to have a community where we can share authentically, challenge each other respectfully, is part of what we do every day.
That's excellent. Yeah. So thinking about, I appreciate that blend of that human element of seeing one another as humans and leaning into that a bit. I'm curious about that. So, how do you support the relationship building between students to move past assumptions and stereotypes to really see the humanity in one another, especially maybe a student or a perspective from a student that they might have initially dismissed or misunderstood? Curious, any strategies that you have?
I think it starts with modeling in terms of the teacher, right? Um, I can think back to several students that I had that had different beliefs that were, very foreign to me. I grew up in a more rural community, so when I came to Chattanooga, which is a little more urban, I encountered some different beliefs and ideas that I most likely would not have encountered had I stayed in my hometown. Um, and I think it was very important for students to see that um, those beliefs, those ideas, one, didn't shock me, and two, that I treated all students the same, right? I treated them with kindness and respect, no matter who they were, who they identified as, what they wanted to be called. I treated all my students the same because all students deserve kindness and respect. So I think it starts with the modeling piece.
I think your point about modeling is at the heart of everything that I do. I think students probably can figure out my political ideas, not because I share them in class, but because I really believe in sort of writing letters to the editor and sharing my opinions about news of the day. But one person observed some years ago, one of the things about my letter writing is that I'm not in to just be enraged about something. I'm there to share my opinion in a very thoughtful, deliberate way, and that modeling is so important. I don't. I sometimes I'm enraged about something, but I stop for a moment and say, what can I say that people can hear my point of view and 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 read it and feel it's respectful. And so practicing that respectful dialogue is at the core of it. Another example that I wanted to share is that I'm in Boston, and Massachusetts, as a state, is a very, very blue state. And in a very blue state, I live in a very, very blue city. And the reality is that there are students are challenged in general. I'm saying to have and listen to perspectives that don't fall within that blue liberal ideology. So what I decided to do several years ago was to give students an opportunity to hear different points of view by engaging with the school in Montana, which is very, very red as a city, Cindy, Montana. And what they begin to realize is that at the heart of it, before we started talking about any of the issues that divided us, and believe me, there are many, what we discovered is that what do we have in common? We discovered that both schools there was a big um, obsession, I would say, with Taylor Swift, and probably the students in Montana were probably more upset that she had visited Boston more than anything else. But the things that connect us, right? What are the things that connect teenagers, no matter where they are? What are the things that they do on the weekends and do after school? Some things were similar, some things were different. But finding out what the life of a teenager might be in these two different cities was really helpful. Then we begin to unlayer that to talk about some of political issues. Um, One perfect example, going back to what the things that connected us and didn't connect us, is one thing that we discovered is that almost everyone in Montana, in Cindy, Montana High, had experienced hunting, right? And that's just the way that it is, right? And so my students, that was kind of like shocking to them, and they were general was shocking to them. And so I think to be able to say, oh, so maybe that might inform how you feel about gun policies, right? And how we might feel about gun policies being in a different kind of a community. So all of that, just getting to know people, is the first step before getting into the issues, which I found to be
Students are going to know when you are not being authentic, right? They know when you're virtue signaling. It's better to just truly be authentic with your students. Um, I you know I think Julian kind of mentioned that even though he may not explicitly say that he believes X, Y, and Z, students kind of figure that stuff out based on him as a person, right? And I think they probably respect him a lot more because of that.
I know that's a really specific example of something really neat that you've been doing, Julian. I'm curious, Bruce, do you have an example of a moment that stands out to you when you've witnessed barriers breaking down between people?
So I'll give a very personal example. Again, like I said, I came from a more rural county, so I encountered a student that was I guess transgender. That was kind of a first for me in my classroom. And I think there was some assumption, particularly for probably the first 9 weeks or so. And this is my first time jumping into high school, so I started out in middle school. So I think there was an assumption on the students' part that because I came from Upper East Tennessee, my family's mountain people, right? So on all the stereotypes that come with that, that there was I probably wouldn't treat this student the same. I did not, believe that this student should exist or whatever, right? I think the student found in our in our conversations that I didn't treat her any different than I treated any of the other students, and I think there was a particular conversation. I forget exactly what prompted it, um, but I've responded to the students like, "Well, why would I treat you any different than any other student?" And I think that like a light bulb clicked for the student in that moment. That I truly did care about them, and that I valued what they had to say, and I valued them as a human being. And so that student became like I couldn't get rid of that student at that point. They were like attached to my hip at that point. It was truly uh, encouraging, and I felt very life changing for both of us.
It's really powerful because at the heart of it, it's something I keep thinking about. What people just know about us is just a little piece, right? A little description about our background, or maybe we grew up, maybe even our religious identity, or something about our race.
Yeah.
That's it. And from that, there's so many generalizations people make about what we're going to believe about certain political issues. How are we going to treat different people? And at the heart of it, going back to what we've talked about earlier, is what we are in the business of doing as teachers, as educators, is relationship building and connecting to our students and wanting them to achieve. And that's the whole story right there, and why relationships around these issues are so important.
Completely agree. And this has made me think too, as you're talking about all of the different backgrounds that students bring to the classroom and how we interact as educators with these students, is how when you have a school staff, you're also dealing with a lot of adults that come from all different backgrounds, that somehow their paths all landed them at the school or district. And that can lead to some really interesting staff dynamics. And I know, Bruce, earlier you shared about the importance of having a strong leadership and the role of the school or district climate in that work. And both of you as leaders have, I'm sure, done plenty of work with trying to support and encourage staff to engage in complex conversations and inquiry based instruction. All that being said, I'm curious, as a leader from that viewpoint, how are you creating opportunities or tips that you have for connecting staff that might be coming from different backgrounds and building that sense of culture or trust?
I think at the heart of that question of how do we do this working with staff and faculty, in our school, we try to do a lot of our community building work with faculty and staff together so we don't separate faculty and staff. And so we have lots of different people participating in our professional development around community building. And so, for example, each summer for a number of years, we have had an opportunity for faculty and staff to engage in summer reading. And I think that summer reading gives people an opportunity to have a shared experience with this book, this text of as I mentioned, I never thought of it that way, provided faculty and staff an opportunity to share their thoughts about the book, to work in small groups, to be able to talk and explore. And we also were able to do some scenario work. So part of it is modeling almost in some ways the kind of teaching that we do. So professional development, small group work, faculty activities, getting to know each other. Those sorts of things I think really help foster belonging in any school community.
Yeah, and to build off of that, I think for me, the one of the biggest strategies that I utilize was, and I've been waiting to get a Hamilton quote in here. I talk less and smile more. As a leader, right? Even though it's Aaron Burr, I still think it's pretty sound advice in a lot of cases. So, um, I I allowed the teachers that I supported, I listened, right? So many times classroom teachers are just either ignored or they're given lip service. When they encounter a leader who's truly listening to them and taking in everything they're saying, and not talking over them and not shooting down their ideas, I think that plays a big role in helping one, like Julian mentioned, model how you interact with staff, but also connect staff to leadership in a way that I think could be powerful in transforming a culture.
So, in considering the challenges that you faced in bringing people on board with this relationship for civil discourse, have you found any systems or structures that work from the leadership perspective, or maybe tips for that and combating some of the challenges that you faced?
One thing I just was thinking about my experience working over the number of years at the Sphere Summit, and part of the solution that I been working on and continuing to develop is trying to be really intentional about the kinds of resources that I give faculty and staff because I think that I started off just giving them too many resources. So if in response to a current events issue that I wanted the teachers to think about how to discuss in the classroom or an advisory, I would send a whole bunch of resources out and I was really happy, like, oh, they have all these things to choose from. And what I realized is that that was a little bit debilitating to go through all those resources. And so, here is one great lesson plan from Facing History on how to deal with a discussion, for example, about January 6th in the classroom, right? And so being able to give really guided um, materials and support, particularly for faculty, is something that I think that has worked well. And then there's always more that additional reads that I always include in it. But I say these are the top two that you should look at if you really want to think about how to deal with it. I'm finding now, I think this was always true, but I'm finding particularly in the last several years, we as particularly history educators are having to um, explain things that we never knew we had to explain before. There's like, no real guidebook on how to deal with how to, understand how executive orders work and how don't they work and what is the role of Supreme Court and in dealing with some of these issues. And so um, teachers are at a loss on where to begin. And so what I try to do is provide resource opportunities for them and opportunities also. Nothing beats a conversation. Let's talk about what are the kids talking about. In our school, we have a system called pods. So everyone teaching the same course meets regularly to talk about not only students, but also lesson planning, what works well, how we're going to cover explaining, for example, judicial review, which can be really complicated each year. Some classes might get it in a different way. So having those small group meetings and conversations can also be very helpful.
Yeah. I completely agree. The One of the benefits of teaching middle school, um, to start out, was the team structure of the school that I was in. We were able to communicate pretty regularly about various students. So just being able to be in constant communication with the people that you're working with and the students that you're teaching, I think is very valuable. Whether you call that a PLC, a team, a pod, whatever it is, I think that plays an important role in that process.
Thank you both for those tips. I really appreciate the collaborative aspect of both of the work that you do. And I also completely understand the resource flurry, resources everywhere, filtering that, and really being intentional as instructional coaches, directors, admin, as how do we filter those materials, providing support, hitting the needs, but not overwhelming. I personally liked having a curriculum corner where I would share some free resources and tips. However, it's me trying to limit myself on how many links I'm sharing in that corner. So I appreciate that. That being said, I have to ask this question. Is there a favorite Sphere material or program that has made it through that filter that you like to share with your staff?
The civil discourse, I guess it's the primer that you produced. I think that has been so helpful because it really is about everything that we just talked about, thinking about how to center relationships, how to center norms, how to center the conversation, and does a good job explaining why it's important. So that is one thing. The other thing I would say, all the stuff each year that I've had opportunity to attend, is related to the First Amendment has been really valuable. Part of it is because I think the conversation about the First Amendment can be very confusing, and to educators as well as students, and understanding the tensions and how to teach those tensions, has always been something that I think faculty has found very helpful.
So I agree. The primer was is a great resource, and I was able to get like a bunch of copies of that because I had Alan come down and do some PD with our teachers for one of our in services. And the teachers that attended that loved it. They were very thankful for it. But then, like, I also had like copies of the primer that I could physically hand out, but also, of course, it was there digitally. And then the other resource is just the summit itself. I've been like begging teachers to go to summit, and I finally got a handful of teachers this summer to go. And I think they're bought in now. So I'm hoping that the word spreads even more.
This is a perfect opportunity to put in a plug for the summit. I mean, it really has been, personally, the most important professional development opportunity that I've had a chance to participate in. Not only the amazing resources and being able to engage with thought leaders and think tank leaders, all those around a range of political issues and a range of points of view, and to be able to meet colleagues, to be able to meet Bruce, to be able to meet people from all over the country is something that we just don't get, and we're all interested in these really important issues. So I agree with Bruce. If you have a chance to participate, I would say go for it.
Really appreciate both of your thoughts on that from your perspective of engaging with Sphere and our content resources. I completely agree as a Sphere alumna myself. So, there's also some great foundational pieces in our content collection, as you both mentioned, that tie into this relationship building piece and the why and the how of this to really lay that foundation for having those complex discussions, as we've talked over the course of this recording, as far as things like the First Amendment, etc. So, as you know, we all know there are a lot of challenges right now in education and polarization in our society. So, I'm curious, what gives you hope in this work? So, what's giving you hope about students and staff's ability to break down barriers and engage in meaningful dialogue right now?
I often say that I am hopeful because I work with students. I mean, that's the very definition of hope, to be able to work with, in my case, teenagers that have a way of seeing the world in all its complexity, but know that they will and are actually having a stake in shaping the work, thinking about their role as future voters. All of that has given me and continues to give me hope. And then also the amazing teachers that I've had a chance to work with over my tenure at Windsor, and the new teachers that we've hired. Um, their commitment to excellence, their commitment to the profession, their commitment to engaging students and the community, and pushing me and pushing each other, has given me hope, in a way that I think sometimes we don't capture. I feel like a lot of the stories about education in schools are about problems, and certainly there are challenges in so many schools in terms of funding and issues around all kinds of tensions around discourse. Um, and it has been my experience that both educators and students are really creating communities that insists on respect, excellence and just honoring humanity.
100% agree with that. I think about, for one, opportunities like this, where I get to interact with um, teachers like Julian, and I met Sarah and Kobe before, and Intense Fear, and a lot of other professional developments, where I interact with teachers from across the nation, whether that be through NCSS, through Sphere, through any other handful of things I've gone to, meeting those teachers and seeing their passion, seeing the things that they get to do in their classrooms, and just being able to have real, authentic conversations to realize that we're not alone in this. We're all in it together, and that gives me a lot of hope. It's truly invigorating and energizing to meet up with teachers from completely different backgrounds, right? Like Julian is in Boston. I come from the valleys and hills of East Tennessee. It's pretty different, right? I had my first experience in Boston back in December, and I loved it, but it was not East Tennessee. I can tell you that. So
For a closing thought for leaders listening who are wanting to prioritize relationship building and civil discourse, what's your closing recommendation or thought for getting started and being encouraged in that work?
My encouragement is that it's worth it. There's at the heart of all that we do is the work that we do with our students and with each other, and so there's no question it's worth it. And I say that to begin with because it is hard work. It is hard work, particularly in these divided times, and there's a lot of fear that I know. We talked about, how there's the idea of students feel that they might be canceled, but there's self-censorship among faculty because they are afraid to take risks, because they're worried, getting calls from parents and other administrators. So I know those things are real. I want to honor that. And I also want to say that there's a community of educators and administrators that are committed to making sure that there are spaces where you can grow, you can learn, and you can feel supported in what you do.
um, definitely, it is truly worth it, and it is hard work. So I echo that sentiment. Um, Also, I would say, uh, just um, get in and listen to your teachers, right? As educational leadership, it's too easy to kind of get into our own little echo chambers and stay within um, the theories and the various books that we read, right? And we forget that it's teachers that are really kind of driving the change. Those in the classroom that are really driving the change, and so we have to make sure that we are truly listening to these teachers, and getting their input, and making this a collaborative effort, and not just a top down effort, because um, right, like I said, it's everything I try to do was through teacher leadership, because I think it makes a world of difference when it comes from your peers than someone at the top.
Thank you both, Julian and Bruce. Thank you both so much for your insights and leadership and sharing about your experiences. To our listeners, please be sure to check out the show notes for resources on relationship building and civil discourse mentioned in this episode and more.
What stands out most to me about this episode is something both guests continually return to. Relationships aren't just nice to have, they're the foundation of everything. They're what allows students to share unpopular opinions and communities to hold space for real differences. The work isn't easy, but as our guests reminded us, it's worth it. And we're not doing it alone. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a fellow educator who might benefit from these insights. Check out the resources in our show notes, including our leadership toolkit and information about the Sphere Summit. Special thanks to Cecil Sherman for the beautiful intro and outro music, and to Sedona Lamar for making this episode sound so great. Until next time, remember, we're all in this together, building communities where students can authentically share their thoughts, respectfully challenge each other, and see the humanity in every perspective.